Hello and welcome to another episode of the Startup Operator Roundup. I am Roshan Karyappa.
And I'm Gunjan Saha, and together we'll be breaking down the biggest headlines from India's startup ecosystem. If this is the first time you're tuning into this channel, then do consider subscribing because we'll be sharing regular updates from this community. And if you're a regular listener, then please like this video, let us know how we are doing, and share this with your other operator friends. Now, before we dive into these topics, I want to remind you once again that this Thursday, which is the 28th of September, we are coming up with a very first physical event. It's called the Startup Operator Live, and we are doing this in Kormangla Social. The event starts 6 p.m. onwards. You'll see the registration link in the description below. And please do come because we have some amazing founders speaking at this event.
Yeah, so we have Anubhav of Rupify and Ajay of the House Monk. They'll talk about how to build a business sustainably. They've been able to scale in a very capital efficient way, and profitability is in vogue right now. Everyone wants to know how to be profitable and what they should do. It's a fantastic event for founders and operators. I think some fascinating insights on offer. And of course, you get to meet Gunjan and myself. You've seen us on enough episodes. It'll be good to see us in flesh and blood. I mean, we're good people, hopefully. Interesting people also.
We also get to meet a producer.
Our producer. This is the man you should blame for all of this stuff, right? But yeah, we hope to see you there. It's on Thursday, September 28th at 6 p.m. onwards in Kormangla Social.
That's right. The registration link is in the description, and you'll find it pinned in our social media platforms. With that, now let's get back to discussing the highlights from the week. Well, Roshan, this previous week was kind of lull, right? There was hardly any major news, but we still did see some interesting topics emerge.
Right.
Well, first off, of course, we have the rising geopolitical tensions between India and Canada. And well, for those who are not aware of this, India is the fourth largest receiver of Canada's sovereign wealth fund, right? So I'm pretty sure that this rise in geopolitical tension will have some implications for startups. So we'll be discussing that. Then also be talking about the controversies surrounding the FAME 2 subsidies. There are accusations being made that the funds are not being used properly. Funds are being given to companies that are, buying e-scooters from China and marketing them as Make in India. So that's causing a lot of stir and raising a lot of important questions. We'll check that out as well. And last week, the government launched a new initiative called the Skill India Digital. More about these topics in this week's Roundup. Stay tuned. Well, Roshan, how was the week for you?
Well, tensions have been simmering between India and Canada for a while now. I mean, the last few months have seen various Khalistani voices make all sorts of statements. I think a real low point was a couple of months back or so when they had a procession, a tableau in Canada demonstrating Indira Gandhi's assassination. That was, I think, hideous, right? And obviously India made its displeasure known. But this was cited as freedom of expression by the Canadian diplomats, right? And since, we had the G20 recently as well, where Prime Minister Trudeau was given a bit of a cold shoulder. More than that, I should say. His plane was, didn't take off for a good 2 days, right? All of that happened, and it's a bit of an odd timing. On the back of that, Prime Minister Trudeau says there could be potential links between India and the assassination of Khalistani extremist Hardeep Singh Nijjar on Canadian soil. Of course, they don't call him an extremist or anything of that sort. They call him a plumber, right? Or a man invested in service. That's one way of putting it, right? I mean, like Bin Laden was a construction magnate, right? So anyway, while all of this geopolitical stuff is happening, what is the impact on business and startups, right? What is the impact on economy? We were discussing a free trade agreement, contemplating that with Canada at some point of time. We have free trade agreements with the UK, right? And that facilitates more trade, more exports, more imports between the two countries. That is definitely off. I mean, Canada was pushing for a meeting with the businesses in the G20 as well, which India did not, reciprocate, gave that a pass. So it's a bit of a cold shoulder on that front. FTAs usually ease all of the trade and economy between countries. It builds transparency and trust as well. So that is gone. Aside, a lot of Indian students go to Canada for their higher studies. A lot of mid-career professionals of late have migrated to Canada and work in highly skilled companies, highly skilled jobs and so on, right? It's definitely sort of an odd time. It's a bit of I would say a nervous time for Indians in Canada or wanting to migrate to Canada. I think the relationships has been the lowest in history, I would say. We'll have to assert our sovereignty, I mean, I think over and above everything, that is most important. I mean, the jury is out on, what India did or did not do, for what kind of role we had in those assassinations. And these guys are dropping like flies, right? I mean, they're dropping like some of the new tracks that these guys drop, right? So it's a bit of a dicey time for Indians in Canada, or those who are contemplating moving to Canada, I should say.
So in Twitter, ANI News had published this picture of a Canadian diplomat, exiting his car. Someone retweeted that picture saying India's biggest blow to Canada since Ontario teachers pension plan invested in Snapdeal.
I mean, that's hilarious. Some of these sovereign funds and these pension funds and so on obviously invest in startups, and a good amount of that money does come into India. But I'm not sure if that will be affected. I mean, I think that's a bit of a stretch, I would say.
Well, it's also interesting to note that the Canada Pension Fund really invests a lot of money in India. India is the 4th largest receiver of these fundings, and the money goes into very critical projects such as infrastructure, renewable energy, tech, and BFSI. I think until the end of last year, 2022, India received close to $45 billion in funding. That's not a small amount.
No, definitely not. I don't think this will sort of jeopardize that. Last week, JP Morgan has included India's government debt in the bond index. Some of this has already been priced in by the markets, but that is amazing, right? So by June 2024, India will belong in that bond index, and they'll start with a 1% weightage. I mean, soon that will become a 10% weightage. So basically, think of these bonds as governments borrowing money, right? I mean, these are 10-year bonds, and there are different government debts available in the public market, right? And investors, mostly institutional investors, buy up this debt and trade this debt. So India was not included in the index earlier, and now we are going to be included in the index. So which means that some of those foreign investors will invest in Indian government debt also. So think of it as, let's say if it was an equity mutual fund or some index fund, right, and they've decided to add HUL stock or ITC stock, right? Some of that money from investors will make its way to HUL or ITC, right? So that is broadly what the connotation is, and this is quite positive for India as well. So overall, I think India's investment profile, is not really affected, I would say. Canada, of course, has asked its allies like the US, etc., to come down hard on this. But, if you look at what the Secretary of State Blinken of the US talked about this, I mean, he was not very explicit in condemning India, right? I mean, in fact, he said that, we'll wait until there is conclusive evidence, or rather that, after the investigation is over to talk about it. So which means indirectly saying that we don't know yet, right? I mean, we can't conclude yet. So overall, I think it's unfortunate, I would say, certainly, right? And it causes a lot of fear and nervousness for people invested in both these countries. I would say let's hope that things resolve itself as soon as possible. Yeah.
And also, just to add one more point, especially for startups who expand into the North American markets, they do consider starting off from Canada. And now with the blanket visa ban, things might get difficult, and founders may need to look at alternate expansion plans.
Yeah, a lot of these cities, especially within Canada, right? I mean, whether it's Ontario, Vancouver, I mean, some of those areas have very, very liberal tax codes, very easy in terms of setting up businesses. They're obviously doing this to attract businesses. So it is sort of lucrative for Indian startups, I would say, right? Because obviously Canada is pretty rich as a demographic, maybe slightly less complex compared to the US in terms of actually like go to market and stuff. Yeah, I mean, Indians do consider Canada as a target market, in terms of software and other services. Yeah.
Folks, if you are a founder and you are thinking about, okay, how does this change North American expansion plans? Do let us know your thoughts in the comments. Moving on, the FAME 2 scheme. Right? This was launched in 2019 to promote the adoption of EVs and related infrastructure in the country. The Society of Manufacturers of Electric Vehicles, or SMEV, accused the Ministry of Heavy Industries, MHI, which kind of facilitates the FAME subsidies, of removing small and medium EV makers from the FAME 2 scheme and using the subsidy to support loss-making OEMs. The MHI is seeking an additional 1,500 to 1,700 crores from the Finance Ministry for the FAME 2 scheme, which SMEV questions as the MHI has already held back 1,700 crores in unpaid subsidies. Now, that's not a small amount, right? More than 50 companies have received approval under the subsidy, and these companies broadly fall into two buckets. They're either electric vehicle manufacturers or electric vehicle infrastructure providers. And some of the popular names in this list include Ola, they include Tata Motors, they include TVS. And some of these companies have been accused of not adhering to the key requirements to make a claim for the FAME 2 subsidy, right? Which primarily involves localization of manufacturing.
Yeah.
So, what do you think of this accusation?
See, I think we have to step back and analyze why the FAME 2 subsidies were introduced in the first place. To me, primarily two reasons, right? So one is India has this very ambitious goal of net zero by 2070, right? And we want to push for sustainability, we want to push for renewable power and energy and so on, right? So obviously electric vehicles are a key part of that. We've seen phenomenal adoption over the last few years since the scheme has been announced. This is also helpful in displacing the conventional, combustion engine types with electric vehicles over the next 5, 10, 15 years, however long it is going to be, right? I mean, we may see that by 2030 or 2030-ish that there will be more electric vehicles on the road compared to the conventional vehicles, right? And this will require not just OEMs, this will not just require people manufacturing these automobiles, it will also require infrastructure, right? I mean, batteries, charging stations, service, so on and so forth, obviously, right? So one was the sustainability initiative. And the second, post 2020, we saw this Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? I mean, Make in India scheme that was announced and PLI and so on, right? I mean, which was basically to create independence in terms of manufacturing some of these automobiles and so on, right? I mean, or even batteries, devices, components, all of that stuff, right? I mean, that is the philosophical motives behind these FAME 2 subsidies, right? One is the sustainability and second is the Make in India. Now, anything that sort of violates that in principle is, obviously not desirable for us, right? I mean, so classic example would be someone who's importing something from China, sort of rebranding this and selling it in the Indian market, right? I mean, that is not something that the government would like to encourage. And there have been cases of that sort, right, where people have imported these low-cost bikes, have basically made a few changes, adjustments, and rebranded them to sell here in the Indian market. That is not desirable. The other thing that the government perhaps is concerned about is that EV innovation is happening at the higher end of things, right? So think about super bikes and think about even bikes like Ather, which at $1.5 lakh or perhaps around nearing 2 lakhs is not affordable by the common person. The government certainly wants to encourage innovation at the lower end of the spectrum, right? I mean, think of transport vehicles, auto rickshaws, three-wheelers, and so on. Not to say that innovation is not happening there. There is definitely a lot of innovation that's happening there. But that's something that they want to encourage more, right? So the government has been thinking about doing away with this FAME 2 subsidies. At least, I mean, that's what the rumor mills have been saying. It's a finite time period up to when this will be available. And it'll be interesting to see how some of these companies will manage without that, right? Because your scooter or whatever could cost, 20, 30K additional, right? So are the incentives aligned enough, interesting enough for people to actually do that? I mean, we'll have to wait and watch. Meanwhile, I think, there are loopholes and there are abuses. As with any government regulation, as with any SOPs and subsidies, this is bound to happen. I won't say that this is a very big deal, but let's hope that the money goes in for the right incentives and for the right initiatives, right? So I hope they work this out.
So you made a point on sustainability, and yes, it's great that the government is really pushing for EV adoption. But apart from EV adoption, the government is also talking about green hydrogen cells. The government is also talking about ethanol blending, right? So I think by 2030, the entire automotive industry could look very different from what it looks today.
I was listening to Mr. Chandrasekharan of TCS talk about how India is acutely positioned to grow from an economy perspective. And he felt that one of the 3 or 4 pillars is sustainability, right? Sustainability, while countries like, for example, Germany or the US have massive investments in existing fossil fuel energy sources, right? India is starting virtually at 0, or let's say, at 1 with all of these sources, right? So we can kind of invest in sustainability and use that to our advantage. So there is no legacy as such that we have to overcome, right? So the incentives are fairly aligned on that front. You're going to see a lot of interest in the space just from the inbound that we get on the startup operator, right? Suddenly we are seeing like a huge influx of people operating on sustainability, climate change, EV, and renewables. and so on, right? So yeah, I mean, do check out this. The last podcast that we did was with Advait of Boon, right? Yeah, do check that out. It was a fun, interesting conversation. Yeah, somewhere there, I suppose. Yeah.
Moving on. And now, while as a country we are making this huge progress into positioning ourselves as a tech leader, as a sustainable leader, we also need a workforce to carry out these initiatives, right? And towards that, the Union Minister for Skill Development and Entrepreneurship, Mr. Dharmendra Pradhan, launched Skill India Digital, which is a digital platform for skilling, education, employment, and entrepreneurship in India. SID is a digital public infrastructure that aims to make skill development more innovative, accessible, and personalized. It supports multiple Indian languages, Aadhaar-based eKYC, mobile-first approach, and digitally verified credentials. This will also act as a comprehensive information gateway for all government skilling and entrepreneurship initiatives. SID will also enable learners to acquire relevant skills, stay updated with industry trends, and contribute to the country's workforce development, and facilitate talent hiring and lifelong learning and career advancements. Very recently, we overtook China to become the most populous country in the world. And the entire media was talking about, okay, India will now reap the demographic dividend, right? I think the government is really doing a great job to capitalize on that.
Well, not yet. We definitely have to work harder. We don't spend as much of a percentage of GDP on education as we should, right? But I also feel that EdTech is where India can sort of mitigate, reduce some of the expenses that conventional education would have us incur for sure, right? I mean, we don't have to think of brick and mortar schools. We don't have to think about staffing every village with all of these teachers and whatnot. I mean, we have to think about edtech, right? And edtech innovation in terms of MOOCs, in terms of virtualization, in terms of providing the technology infrastructure at every node in every village, city, etc., for students to perhaps learn and educate themselves, right? Because I think that's the way out. That's really the way out. We have some of the best teachers in the world here, right? And it's just a question of putting all of these MOOCs on a central platform, making it accessible to people. And with India having the cheapest cost for data anywhere in the world, right? And also the highest consumption of data, I think this can be very, very useful. I do feel like Indians have to learn, right? The demographic dividend will be a dividend only when there are skills and there are jobs and, people start up and so on and so forth, right? And to that end, I think this is a great initiative. So let's see how it pans out.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to some fundraise news, we are not seeing any significant uptick, the amount of venture capital that's flowing in. We are seeing checks being cut out to startups in the growth stage. Kuku Fm announced that it has raised $25 million in Series C funding, which was co-led by Nandan Nilekani's Fundamentum Partnership and International Finance Corporation. This is indicative that that investors have a increased interest in digital audio content. Then we have agritech startup Ergos, who announced on Friday that they have raised $10 million in a Series B funding round, which was led by Oslo and a Norway headquartered financial inclusion fund called Abler Nordic. Then we have online visa application platform Atlas, who announced that they have raised $12 million in a Series A funding round. And this was led by Peak 15 Partners, or formerly Sequoia Capital India, and Elevation Capital. So, hey, this adds up. We have a Series A, we have a Series B, and we have a Series C.
Yeah, still few and far in between. I would say the funding frenzy has long since over. Yeah, interesting. I really like that Kuku has raised another round, right? More power to them. I mean, they're on this whole monetization journey, and Bisu is someone we hosted about a couple of years back on the podcast. And what I really liked was his vision was so clear. He's one of those founders. He seems really perseverant and very, very motivated to solve for content and entertainment for tier 2 to tier 3, right? And digital audio content is definitely growing. We are certainly seeing it in the podcast numbers itself. So yeah, great that they've raised a round, and wish them all the best, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay, for the talk of the town section, now this is something very exciting. Neuralink recently announced that they're recruiting people for the first in-human clinical trial tests. And Elon Musk retweeted that, saying the first human patient will soon receive a Neuralink device. This ultimately has the potential to restore full body movement. In the long term, Neuralink hopes to play a role in AI risk reduction by improving human to AI and human to human bandwidth by several orders of magnitude. Imagine if Stephen Hawking had this.
Yeah, I mean, this is all of your sci-fi dreams come true, I would say, right? Phenomenal. We have an intervention to sort of offset any neurological, disorders. Unheard of even, I would say, 15, 20 years back, right? So fantastic stuff. And I don't know, I mean, I think it might become fairly common in 5, 10 years time to have people with chips in their
But it's scary.
brains or bodies, I would say.
Well, right now, I mean, we do hear stories of people who have NFC grafts underneath their skin just so that they can tap into doors, pay for metro and stuff. And right now, we're talking about direct brain implants.
Yeah, I mean, it's the future is scary and exciting, I would say.
All right, folks. So these were the key updates from this week. And well, before we forget,
Yeah. Speaking of scary and exciting, but not scary for sure, right?
it's exciting.
It's exciting.
We're talking
Yeah,
the same
overall.
thing, right?
We're talking about the startup operator live. Yeah. Yeah. So, folks, next week we're going to be doing our first startup operator live on September 28th, which is a Thursday. That's 2/8, not 20, 2/8. Thursday at Kormangla Social. Do come over with friends, family, operators, whoever else. Right, it's going to be a fun conversation, I should say. We're going to host Anubhav of Rupify and Ajay of the House Monk. Both of them are going to talk about their profitability journey, about growing efficiently and building a sustainable business. All of these things are in vogue right now. And yeah, you'll get to meet Gunjan and myself and Thiru, who's our producer. Hopefully, we'll have some cool swag on offer as
We'll
well.
have cool swag on offer, and it's in Kormangla Social, so you definitely know what else you can expect.
What can you expect?
Come and find out.
All right.
That's it for this week. We'll be back again next week with more interesting updates. Once again, if you are the first time listener to this show, please consider subscribing to this channel for regular updates from the Indian startup ecosystem. And if you're a regular listener, do let us know how you're doing. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Like this video, share this video, and
See you guys. See you on Thursday.